Now, finally, we've understood Gukesh's plan, and the plan is very potent. That would be a disaster for Ding's position. And suddenly the board is very clarified. Ding is now going to bring out his king. Anything other than that would be weird. Good evening or afternoon, Asia. Good morning, Europe. And what are you doing up, Americans? Well, let me tell you why you're up. We're ready for the 5th game of the World Chess Championship. And it being the weekend, we are alone in the office today with all the potential technical issues that entails. But something that's not wrong is the fact that on my right side, I have my co-commentator, the person doing the texting out on the app. It's Rødsmoen.
Volume because you were speaking so loud in my headset, and I was twisting and turning everything I could, but now we're good. So now we're ready. Now we're ready for hours of chess.
Yeah, and the players are already sitting down doing their handshake in Singapore. And this game is very, very close to getting started. What are your expectations for the opening mode?
My expectation is that that Gukesh will try to make something out of the white pieces. I've added a poll in our app to ask our viewers or the people with the app. I wrote, Gukesh won last time he had the white pieces. Will he play his queen's pawn again in this game? And that's what I'm hoping to figure out. And the viewers think, no, he'll play something different.
Okay, that's interesting because the queen's pawn is what Gukesh used to tie the match in game 3. So personally, I think he's going to continue in that variation that gave him that initial win and going to try to build on that. But it all depends on where the good ideas are and what they have prepared for the match. So far, I would say it's pretty spectacular how White, in 4 games in a row, in my opinion, has been able to put pressure on the opponent. Yesterday's game did end in a draw, and it ended fairly quickly. But I still maintain that in the early middle game, right out of the opening, there were some tricky situations for Gukesh to deal with. And it has to be said, he dealt with it magnificently to make what then appeared like an easy draw. But it is my contention that it was not as easy as Gukesh made it look. And of course, that is a sign of a champion.
And it's also going to be interesting if Gukesh does play his queen's pawn, will Ding do something else? He has to, right?
Well, he has to play something other than what lost him the game. But for 1 point in that game 3, the chess engines were saying that even though the position was dangerous, it was completely okay for Ding. So at some point today, something different than what has happened previously in the tournament is going to happen. And then it's unclear whether that's going to happen already on move 1 or maybe even as far into the game as move 8 or 9.
All right. So the players have arrived. I'm going to post a picture of that to our app, but we also have to get ready to watch out for their first moves.
And we have had the honorary first move being made. So let's go to game 5. And we're off. Gukesh makes his move. He does push a pawn 2 steps forward in the middle. But as far as I can tell, it is not the queen's pawn. I think Gukesh here goes back to the recipe of game 1. He pushes the king's pawn 2 steps forward. And sensationally, Ding continues playing his risky French opening. I may have, during game 1, Mod, said that I thought Ding's French was dubious. But I guess the more correct answer for that is that it's risky. And wow, after the pawns push forward in the middle, that we have the starting point for the French defense, and instead of playing the very tricky but normally good for white knight out from Gukesh, which is what he did in game one. Game one, let's remember, Gukesh got an advantage from the opening, but still ended up losing the game. Now Gukesh deviates from that, but he deviates by playing something that has a reputation for not being very dangerous to the opponent whatsoever. Gukesh plays the exchange French variation, simply making a trade between the pawns in the middle of the board, and then when Ding recaptures, both players have identical positions. Both players lacking the pawn in front of their king, and both having the queen's pawn 2 steps forward. It's a very symmetrical position, and whenever the pawns are identically placed, and it's difficult to figure out a way for the pawns to be have some interesting developments. Then that gets a drawish reputation, and so does this position. The knight moves out from Gukesh. He wants to have it in towards the middle. He wants to castle as quickly as possible. This has become a priority now for both players to get your king castled as soon as possible, not just because of the safety of their king, but because now with this file in the middle of the board being completely without pawns, they want to rush their rooks into the center of the board. And then the knight moves out also from Ding. Bishop out from Gukesh. And in a very surprising development to me, Ding, instead of just continuing to copy his opponent's moves, Ding is the one lashing out with his pawns. This is very surprising to me. Gukesh plays what is considered reasonably harmless, but I must say that, for instance, Magnus Carlsen has had the belief that white can get some advantage in the exchange French variation. But normally, black just tries to sit there and kind of copy white's moves, and they're usually okay later on. But Ding doesn't want to sit here and copy white's moves. He rushes his pawn 2 steps forward, attacks in towards white's pawn in the center. And I gotta say, I really like Gukesh's response. Pawn 1 step forward. I've studied this move myself. I think it's a good move. One of the key points is that if now Ding tries to advance his pawn even further, which is the normal plan for black in these situations, the good thing now is that Gukesh can move his bishop 1 step back towards the side of the board. Normally, you would have to move it back in front of your king. The advantage of instead moving it away from the middle is that then it will actually still be pointing towards the middle. That is the irony of the bishops. When the bishop is actually themselves in the middle of the board, then they're pointing out towards the sides. But here, you want to have it a bit away from the middle so that it's still pointing, in particular, to this important e4 square. And these moves have actually happened in the game.
Yeah, they have. And I would say I'm very surprised that Ding is playing so quickly, and that he is kind of really going for something here.
Well, I mean, you cannot be surprised that he's playing quick. When you're playing risky stuff, and like Ding has now played the French defense, which I think in itself is risky, especially when you already played it earlier in the match, so your opponent can expect it. But then he goes ahead and does this aggressive pawn push before he gets his king into safety. That's also risky. And the only way you can justify this sort of risky play is if you are very well prepared. So if he plays risky stuff and doesn't play instantly, that would be shocking. But Ding making his moves quickly is absolutely necessary because that's how he justifies the risk he takes with the pawn advance. And I gotta say, this position is very interesting. And Gukesh is playing rather quick him as well. And the obvious move here would be to castle the king, but instead Gukesh moves his queen forward. He prioritizes to give a threat on the black king instead of getting his own king into safety. Because if white had castled, then Ding could castle and the black king would escape. So Gukesh wants to attack the black king before the black king is able to castle. This is such an interesting start to the game. And it seems like both players are reasonably prepared for this, considering the pace at which Gukesh played this, I would say, uncommon. Well, a lot of things that have happened so far is uncommon. I'm going to look it up.
Yeah, please do.
In the database.
I've just managed to comment all of the moves now, but it's been quite stressful because they've been playing so fast, as you say. But I'm very eager to hear if this is a normal sequence of moves. I also think it was interesting that...
So pushing the pawn 2 steps forward was uncommon, but not unheard of. From Ding. It was played in a bit over 10% of games to reach that position. In turn, Gukesh playing the pawn to c3, this move I was praising, that was not the most common option, but it was still played quite a bit. But then Ding continuing forward with his pawn to attack the bishop, that had only been played 9 times previously. So at no point has Ding really played the most common move going into this situation. The bishop stepping back was, of course, the plan of the previous move. The bishop coming out from Ding was common to do. And now queen check. Here, previously, 5 games have seen white castling their king, allowing black to castle unhindered as well. But instead, after the queen check, we already, within 10 minutes of the start of this game, have only one previous game where this has happened previously. I gotta say, I'm really excited about the innovativeness and the risk-taking of the players in this match.
But who are the people who have played this game? Are there anybody that you'd heard of before?
I have heard of the guy with the black pieces, Michael Prusikin, I think, is a German player. Fabio Bellini, obviously Italian, I would think. And they played in the Swiss Team Championship in 2023. So quite a recent game as well. And surprisingly, in that game, black decided to move their bishop 1 step back. The bishop that on the previous move went 2 steps forward, now that bishop goes 1 step back to stop the check. And that's controversial, right? Moving the bishop twice in a row. And I feel like Ding may want a different approach here. Yes, Ding has chosen a different approach. Ding has chosen instead to move his queen. So Ding is moving his queen in between to blockade this check. And that is a new move. a new move in chess reasonably early here between these two players.
Okay, I haven't gotten that move yet in our app, but let's hope it will arrive shortly then, Ludvig. Because you're seeing this on the FIDE screens.
We're seeing it on the camera from Singapore. So the queen moved in between.
And that's a novelty?
Novelty, never played before, very early on, but also very early on. For the second game in a row where Gukesh has the white pieces, it's a queen trade. Remember the game Gukesh won, game 3? There was a queen trade within the first 10 moves. And the same thing happened here. Ding, he recaptures with his king. King now unable to castle, but that is less of a consequence now that the queens have been traded off. Then it's not such a bad thing to have the king in the middle of the board. Gukesh, he chooses to now castle. The idea not so much that he wants to get the king out on the edge of the board. The main idea is just the ability now to activate your rook and point it down towards Black's king. And Ding is still in his preparation. And he moves his rook from the corner into the middle, ready to kind of escape with his king away from this open area in the middle without locking in your own rook. So if you were to move the king back immediately, then the rook in the corner would really struggle getting into the game. But Ding manages to get that rook first and then wants to evacuate his king. And I don't know, the first impression now, considering the fact that that Ding is continuing at a fairly rapid pace, you got to think that Ding is still in his preparation and that he feels like the current position on the board is completely acceptable to Black.
So I was going to say, it looks like we have some technical issues not getting in the moves, but when we're looking at other boards that are streaming this, I can't see that they either have gotten these moves, Ludvig.
No, there seems to be a relay issue affecting several broadcasters.
All right, so we will just have to wait. But what you have on your board now, that is the situation that the players also have.
Yes.
Yeah. So the queens have been traded, and I have prepared all the comments once we get those moves in. There has been a queen trade, a castle, and kind of a manual castling situation here from Ding.
Yeah, you often call it that when the rook does get into the middle of the board and the king does kind of escape the center. But at the same time, it in a way, it's a better castling, right? Because normally you would do in one step the king over here, and then you could technically go with the rook and then the king closer to the middle. But instead, having the rook over and the king back, that it kind of saves you a move compared to doing the 3 moves with the castling. So I don't feel like Ding has suffered with the fact that he had some that he didn't get to castle because the way he's planning to continue placing his pieces now will both help the rook get into the game and get the king away from some scary stuff in the middle of the board, which is essentially what castling is all about.
All right, and now it is Ding who is spending some time. No, it's Gukesh, I mean. It's Gukesh's turn, and he's spending some time. And we're seeing that there is a problem with the moves that are being sent to us.
Yeah, I mean, we can maybe just move to the board view continuously in order to have the current situation available to the viewers.
And then we will add those comments in the app once we have those. We're getting some questions in the comments. I see somebody is suggesting the bishop goes to g5 for...
Yeah,
Gukesh?
very, very good suggestion. And it's highly, highly likely that this is what Gukesh is going to do. The bishop then would point in towards the black king, but it would also put some pressure on this black knight. And if Ding tries to move his knight to reinforce the protection of his first knight, this would be a big mistake on account of the other white bishop then being allowed to capture a pawn on the side of the board. Here, the problem is that that pawn was previously defended by the knight, but now the knight cannot move due to the bishop's pressure in towards the king. So this bishop move pointing towards the black king is very, very challenging. And to be honest, I'm very curious how Ding would, because Ding cannot go with his king one step back. He would like to get his king out of the way, but this would allow the white bishop to capture the defending knight. And after pawn takes bishop, then once again, this white bishop is able to capture a pawn on the side of the board. So to me, it seems like the only way to deal with this idea, so from the current situation on the board, the only way to deal with this is to move after bishop comes in to attack here. We gotta threaten that bishop immediately, because that also saves the pawn that was repeatedly getting captured here on the side of the board. And then this becomes further tricky, right? Because now the rook can give a check on the king as well. The bishop would have to stop that check. But when the bishop moves back and retains this pressure, now the knight can come in and protect. So even though like black gets super huddled up over just a couple of squares in the middle of the board, and I could easily see Gukesh move his knight forward and then push his pawn up, it feels kind of scary for Ding. But at the same time, if he manages to deal with the most immediate threats on his position, I think he could be fine here. For instance, just move the pawn one step forward to prevent white from continuing up here. And at the end of the day, Ding has gotten the trade between the queens, which has neutralized a lot of white's in initial initiative. So let's go back to the current situation on the board where Gukesh is currently thinking. He's definitely considering that bishop move. It is by far the most logical move to make, but it's also the move that Ding is expecting.
So I see we're still getting some questions in our chat on our stream. There is some technical issue. It's lagging on the host of this World Championship end. So several broadcasts are affected, but we have the correct position now on our board. And once the moves do get transferred to us in the technical way, we will have the comments on those ready. So this board, this physical board, this is how the players are seeing it, and this is how we will have to see it for now. And then also, it's worth noting that it's Gukesh's turn. Can you see anything about how much time he has left?
Yeah, so Gukesh so far has spent 15 minutes, and Ding has spent 5 minutes. So where basically the clocks that we have on our design is accurate if it was opposite. That Ding was the one with 155, and Gukesh was the one with 140-ish. And what that tells us is that Ding has come well prepared for this opening, despite Gukesh being the one to unleash the first surprise. It could not have been expected that Gukesh would choose the exchange French variation, considering how aggressively he played against Ding the last time in the first game of this match. So Gukesh is kind of trying out different approaches. And for the first game, he was feeling super combative. But now maybe he feels like...
we're getting the moves now. We're getting the moves.
Going to play calmly.
We can get our board back because now we have finally gotten those moves. Our board is up to date. And I am updating that the move a couple of moves ago was a novelty, and we're in a completely new position. So you need to be talking now, because I have to be copy pasting some stuff.
Yeah, no, but I'm looking at the position, and I'm looking at the eval bar we have on the app, saying that it's a balanced position, but it's a very uncommon position, and one that it seems Ding has prepared, and Gukesh not so much. So maybe for the first time in the match, we will be calling this a success for Black in the opening. So far, a lot of the openings have led to White getting a slight advantage, sometimes a major advantage. But this time, it might be that Gukesh is unable to really pose a lot of problems with the white pieces. I would say it's too early to call right now, though, because Gukesh still needs to get his pieces on the queen's side into the game, and Gukesh has the ability to move his knight forward into the middle of the board. And these are moves that will feel problematic for a Black player, because the knight is so good, and maybe even a pawn can come in to reinforce the knight and even push further forward at a later stage. So these kind of things, they feel like they should be good for White, but the combined information of Ding's impressive pace and Gukesh's spending so much time to think right now, and the chess engine evaluating the current situation as balanced, is making me think that, Ding has a plan for how to deal with the immediate threats on his position.
I think it's also interesting that if one of the things that Ding had prepared was in this exchange variation to advance all the way with this pawn, maybe that is a very normal plan, but to me, I'm always thinking that I don't like this kind of pawn structure, because I always have to be careful that everything is so close to falling apart.
Yeah.
So I think this is such a, it's a very interesting way to play, or plan to play, when you have the black pieces and you're usually very happy with a draw, and you're not going to be taking that many chances.
Agreed. It's an ambitious way of playing, and I think you've perfectly highlighted the problem of advancing that pawn so far up the board, because what will often happen is that the remaining pawn in the middle of the board, now it's unable, normally in the French, or at least in this French exchange variation, you place your pawns so that they protect each other up the board. But with this guy being so far advanced, that means the pawn on d5 is lacking defenders.
Okay, we have to interrupt you, Ludvig. We've had some moves. Gukesh decided to check the king and trade the rooks.
Yeah, very surprising, I think. It felt like it was more challenging to move the bishop pointing towards the king. By giving the check with the rook, Gukesh is allowing Ding to get out of the way. And now after the trade between the rooks, if I'm Ding, I would seriously consider even capturing back with my knight.
But he's recaptured with the with the king.
Okay. So the reason I think he doesn't capture with a knight is because he learned from Bobby Fischer. Bobby Fischer once gave away one of these pawns on the side of... No, he once took one of these pawns on the side of the board, and his bishop ended up never getting back. But on this occasion, I think maybe the bishop survives. That is my speculation. And that could be the reason for why Ding prefers moving his king back into the open in order to take out this white rook.
All right, and then after the king recaptured, we saw that Gukesh played this bishop to g5 that we discussed earlier, putting pressure on that knight, maybe threatening a pawn over there.
Yeah, the pawn on the side of the board is in trouble. Maybe this is why Gukesh went for the trade between the rooks first, because previously we could have had this situation with the king still close to the black knight, and then we said, well, if you now just push your pawn forward on the side of the board, then we can attack the bishop, and the bishop cannot really take our knight, because then the king will make the recapture. Whereas now, with the king further back on the board, now if you go pawn one step forward on the side of the board, the capture between the bishop and the knight leads to the pawn having to take out the white bishop, but that has ruined the pawn formation, and it has ruined the ability of these pawns on the king's side of the board to defend each other, which together with the weakness of the pawn in the middle would be catastrophic for Ding. So Ding is still in his preparation. He continues moving quickly. He moves his knight to defend his other knight. That is a very reasonable move, because we saw the consequences of what would happen if the bishop managed to take the knight and Ding had to recapture with a pawn. Now he's getting ready to recapture with his knight instead. But now also the black knight is blocking the bishop's ability to get into the game. So this is disrupting some of the coordination in Ding's camp. And in fact, if this bishop cannot get into the game, neither can the rook on the edge of the board. So Ding now is struggling. He needs to get his rook into this open file, but he's struggling to make that happen because the other pieces are kind of interrupting each other. I still have some confidence in him because it does appear like he has analyzed this previously and knows what he's getting himself into. I would be hugely surprised if Ding did anything other than move his knight out.
Gukesh, you mean?
Sorry, Gukesh. Although now that I think about it, do you think Gukesh can move his knight, try and move it forward along the edge of the board?
I can ask our app because we have the best computer move there. And actually, it's the other knight that the computer wants to move. Kind of surprising, but kind of continuing the plan of attacking on the king side.
So
Yes.
it has to be the knight going forward with the intention of continuing further forward, attacking the bishop and also attacking this pawn. But moving a piece to the edge of the board, having only the intention of one square that you're trying to move to, it feels like... And also, it's taking away the bishop's ability to go backwards. So now, if I move the pawn forward to attack the bishop is going to have to go all the way back. Because normally, I was planning to move that bishop back where you now put the knight.
Well, he did Gukesh did play the knight move that you were suggesting.
Yeah, no, that made a lot more sense. So the knight moves into the center of the board. It also opens up the path for the rook to get involved on the next move. And when the rook gets involved, that's going to be a check on Ding's king. It feels like Ding is under some heavy pressure right now. The chess engines feel that this is a balanced position, but this is one of those situations where you really got to know what you're doing in order to come out and survive on the other end. That being said, everything so far in this game suggests that Ding does know what he's doing. And I want to point out that we had the first new move of this game like 7 moves ago, maybe even more. And Ding is seemingly still in his preparation. So these top-level players, not only are they inventing new ways of playing, they're studying those things very deeply so that they still have pre-prepared moves way beyond the first time the position is ever seen in top-level chess.
Wow. And it's also interesting to kind of speculate how out of preparation Gukesh is, because he's now spent 23 minutes on these first 14 moves. And he spent 13 minutes kind of coming up with this plan of trading the rooks and then moving his bishops and knights out. So do you think that was something he had seen before, or is that something he created in those 13 minutes he was thinking?
I think everything Gukesh has done so far has been reasonably obvious.
Okay.
But the thing is, there's a lot of nuance to when you execute your plan. So it was difficult for Gukesh to know, should I move my bishop out first or use my rook first? So the moves in themselves are fairly straightforward, but the order in which you execute your plans, that's where the top level stuff comes into play. And Ding is now thinking, this is his first think of the game. So it would suggest that he is now out of his preparation, the stuff he planned in advance of the game. And obviously the stuff you prepare before the game, you can use a computer, a chess engine to evaluate. Whereas now he's having to think on his own. And Gukesh is about to bring his rook into the game. Gukesh has all his pieces participating in the attack down towards Black's king. But the bishop and the rook that Ding has here in the corner of the board, those pieces are struggling to get into the game. And that's what it's going to be all about now for the foreseeable future. Can Ding figure out how to get these queenside pieces into the game?
It doesn't look very easy, but I guess one of the things he's going to have to do at some point, he needs to move this bishop, and then I guess he needs to kind of chase away some of these white pieces. So maybe, and I've also seen some of our comments in the chat are saying to play the pawn to h6. Some people are worried they're going to lose that pawn, so they want to chase that bishop away.
Yeah,
looks
that
reasonable.
Makes perfect sense. And then the bishop steps back. And while you've gotten your pawn off of the diagonal where the white bishop was pointing down, you still have the recurring issue that you need to get your bishop out. But in order to do so, you got to move the knight that's standing in the way of the bishop. But the knights that's here, that one has a very important job, because if this one moves out of the way immediately to open up for the bishop, well, then Gukesh can say, okay, I moved on my bishop back on the previous move, but now that you're no longer defending your kingside knight with your other knight, then I'm actually going to move that bishop a second time in a row, capture the black knight at the moment where black only has the pawn to make the recapture. And that would be terrible for Ding, because then his pawns on the king's side of the board, they can no longer work together. They can no longer defend each other. And they are long-term massive weaknesses. I would go as far as to say this is close to a winning situation for Gukesh, just based on the pawn's placement on their own, and also the fact that White has some very nice plans to gain control of the square in front of the black pawns, and there are no black pawns that are able to kick this white knight out of black's half. So this would be just absolutely a terrible, terrible situation for Ding. But then the question becomes, how can you move this knight to get the bishop out without damaging your pawn situation? And the answer to this, and it's potentially the only good plan in the entire position. So Ding might be very, very, he really needs to figure this out, but it has a great internal logic to it. What I'm talking about is the move knight out on the edge of the board.
I've seen a lot of our viewers in our chat are suggesting to just advance these pawns on the queen side, but you're saying instead to move a knight to the side of the board where it looks like it's doing nothing.
Well, to be fair, advancing the pawns on the queen side maybe is okay as well. But the advantage of moving this knight forward to the edge of the board is that now the other knight no longer has to defend its buddy. So now the other knight can move out of the way in order to let the bishop get into the game. And even though this knight is on the edge of the board, it's also doing a really valuable task of controlling the white bishop. So if the white bishop now moves back and tries to trade with one of the important black defensive bishops in the center of the board, well, then Ding would be able to capture that bishop with his knight. So I think this is a very interesting plan with the knight moving out to the edge of the board. I think pushing the pawn up to attack the bishop, I'm basically taking that move for granted. I can really not see Ding doing anything else, because as our chat has pointed out, the bishop pointing in this pawn's direction is potentially very dangerous. And for instance, if you move your knight out to the edge immediately, then you have to consider the fact that the pawn may be captured. And even though it's risky taking such a pawn as black cuts off the bishop's retreat, it's not immediately obvious whether this bishop is getting trapped.
And I guess that Gukesh, being good at calculations, he will calculate that for like 30 minutes and then figure out how to get a pawn if that's what he's going to need to do.
Yeah, but maybe he'll also figure out that you cannot take the pawn. And maybe that's what Ding is thinking about now, whether this pawn needs protection and wants to chase the white bishop, or maybe he just wants to push his pawns forward on the queen side immediately. Because one thing I will say about this pawn push on the side of the board, if white considers it favorable to get a trade between the two bishops, then pushing the pawn forward and attacking white's bishop would be maybe even a mistake in terms of the white bishop then being chased to a square where it's easier to try and challenge black's bishop later on. And we talked about this in the game yesterday, that when you have your pawns on dark squares in the center of the board, then you are usually happy to trade off your bishop that moves on dark squares with your opponent's bishop moving on dark squares. Because then Ding would be left in a similar situation as Gukesh was yesterday, where he had a bishop moving on the light squares and his pawns in the middle were also on the light squares. I mean, yesterday it did work out for Gukesh in the end, but he was under some pressure, partly because of this positional phenomenon.
It's very fun to sit here and read what people are writing, because someone has said that they think they found that website you mentioned yesterday, Ludvig, with like these weird, some Dutch guy who had these weird records in chess, the most amount of captures. I found this website here suggested by...
Yeah, this is the guy.
What was the guy who suggested this? Willem. He wrote that this is the site. I haven't found the like most captured record here anywhere, but we have the website now, and we will know what is the greatest number of takes, because we're waiting for this take situation, as that is what the app is called. But we're wondering, what is the most amount of checks that have happened in a game in a row?
Why are we wondering this now?
Well, we were wondering this yesterday.
Oh, okay.
And I'm just saying that the viewers are very good at remembering our struggles from yesterday, and they found the site that will give us the answer to that. So we'll have to look into that when we have more time. And then there are some people that are suggesting that you should retreat the knight back to g8 instead of to h5. Is that something you consider?
So I'm assuming we're pushing the pawn
probably
first to kick the bishop back. I think moving the knight back, I'm not so fond of, partly because of what we just talked about, that a trade between the bishops could be favorable for white, considering how white has most of their pawns on the dark squares, and then trading off the dark squared bishops could be advantageous. So part of the thing about moving this knight forward is also that it restricts the movement of white's bishop while also getting out of the bishop's crosshairs. But in any case, it's very clear that Ding is now out of his preparation.
Spending almost 13 minutes now on this move. So, yeah, he's probably having to think for himself now. But don't you think that he'll probably still know of some of the main ideas, as he's played so fast up until this point?
He'll definitely know some ideas. But the main thing about when your preparation ends is that you go into the position with the knowledge that this is supposed to be okay for you. So you use the context of, well, this was in my preparation, so I've definitely not made a mistake. I know there's a good plan here. And sometimes that makes you better able to figure out the right plan, especially when, like Ding is now, you're in a position that looks quite risky. And then Ding is going to be like, my opponent, he has all these pieces getting into the game. This is unpleasant for me. But I know this was part of my pre-game preparation, so I know there is some solution to be had. And now he's trying to figure out that solution. I think it's a very, very smart play from Ding that he's really taking his time right now. Because if he finds... It's so important to find the right plan right now. And if he does, then he's gonna have a nice game.
All right. So it's going to be interesting now. Do you think he could consider playing one of these pawns on the queen side that so many of our viewers really want to suggest?
Yeah, no, definitely. So pushing the queenside pawns is an interesting possibility. It kind of it's the complete opposite of what we have been saying with the coordination of these two knights. We've been saying that the first knight needs to move so that the second knight can move without the first knight being captured so that the bishop can get into the game. Even though it's about the knight moving, the end goal has always been the bishop. Or rather, should I say, the end goal has always been the rook in the corner, but in order for this rook to get into the middle, the bishop has to move out of the way first. Pushing your pawns forward on the queen side has that same intention. It's not really just about pushing pawns forward to be aggressive. It's also about creating space for the bishop so that the bishop can move out and the rook move in to the middle. And that seems like an okay move as well. It's gonna depend very much on timing right now. Ding needs to play 3 or 4 moves in order to get his rook into the game. And then it's just a question of how much damage, how many threats can Gukesh create in the 3-4 moves that Ding is going to need to get his rook into the center of the board. And frankly, to me, it looks like Gukesh can do quite a bit of damage. So, for instance, if the pawn pushes forward on the side of the board, the rook will come into the middle, check towards the king. The king is going to escape. And then the knight moves forward, gets a good positioning in the center of the board. And now, to give an example of the problems that Ding is facing, if Ding now continues his plan of getting his bishop out, he's 1 move away from getting his rook into the center of the board. But here, the trade, the white knight capturing the black knight obviously has to make that recapture, but now it has abandoned the protection of the pawn on the side of the board.
I see what you're doing now.
And if the bishop comes in and captures that pawn, you cannot try to trap that bishop and try to prevent the bishop from getting back, because we're not going to be able to use this during any of the games. It never happens, a checkmate in a world championship match. But in the analysis, a checkmate can happen. And the 2 bishops checkmate the king together with the white rook controlling down the center of the board. And I think variations like these illustrate really well why it could be very beneficial for Ding to push his pawn 1 step forward on the side of the board, because that then would get the pawn away from some of the potential danger. On the other hand, that would allow the white bishop to improve its positioning. So there's a lot of nuance here that Ding needs to cover.
Well, so we're not going to see that checkmate on the board, but it's still interesting that could happen so quickly in the game. And I see we're also getting some questions about our clock, because as you can see, we can only see how much time Ding has spent, but not how much time he has left. Again, related to some technical difficulties we're having. But we can update you guys that Ding, he has just under 1.5 hour left on his clock now. But spending 20 minutes on this one, now he's actually down on time compared to Gukesh.
So Ding comes storming out of the gates, was prepared for longer than Gukesh, but once he's out of his preparation, then he's feeling the pressure. He's feeling that, ooh, my position is a bit risky. Maybe he feels like the position is riskier than he had originally thought based on his analysis. On the other hand, if we look at the eval bar on the bottom of our graphic, the white and the black area is very, very similar, and it's getting a balanced evaluation from the chess engines. So where Ding needs to find the accurate moves, but if he does, he'll probably manage to deal with the short-term initiative that Gukesh has on account of Gukesh having all his pieces involved in the game already.
So we received a message from Zaini, who also had a bit of a scary threat for Gukesh, even though it's Ding's turn. Is it a threat that Gukesh can play his bishop and pin this other knight?
If the bishop moves out on the edge of the board to point down towards the black king, I think the black king can very simply just move out of the way. This would not be a threat that I'm very concerned about. Not at least because the white bishop will then have moved away from the pressure towards the pawn on the side of the board, which has been the main source of worry in our other analysis. So I would say no, I'm not very concerned about the bishop pointing towards the black king.
All right.
That being said, we can make a case here for Ding just moving his king out of the way to begin with. Because then he would avoid that bishop even being able to point down towards the king. And he would try to get more information about White's plan moving forward. Very likely, Ding is going to have to move his king out of the middle anyway. And then if there's a move you have to make anyway, oftentimes it can be smart just to do that immediately and then see how your opponent responds. And based on their response, you can maybe you want to have one plan if they play, say, pawn push on the queen side to start attacking over here. Or if you want a different plan if they move the rook into the middle. And then you can kind of get that information for free by playing a move you were bound to do anyway. Unfortunately, the problem is if Ding moves the king, then that's not going to tell us anything about what he's planning. Because that's the one move that we know he's going to do at some point in the next 3 moves, no matter what.
Should we be worried now that Ding is spending 24 minutes on this move? Is he going to get into time trouble again?
I don't think he needs to be concerned about time trouble. They have played a lot of moves very quickly today. In fact, for the first time in the match, the players are averaging less than 3 minutes per move. So if anything, today's game has progressed way, way faster than on previous days. So absolutely no cause for concern just yet. But if Ding gets this decision wrong and continues this kind of time usage, then it could be an issue. But it makes a lot of sense for Ding, who just stopped his preparation. So he knows, okay, this knight move into the middle, that seems like a very sensible thing. But this was not the move that we studied, which is a reasonable expectation based on the fact that the knight moving out to the edge of the board was the chess engine recommendation on the previous move. So maybe Ding had analyzed that, but not analyzed the obvious move of moving the knight into the middle and the rook coming in afterwards. And now he's got to readjust, but he also feels like, okay, there must be a reason why we did not study this obvious move. And so Ding probably feels like there is a solution to the current situation. And if I invest 30, 40 minutes to figure out that solution, that could save me a lot of thinking time later on. Because if I find the correct plan here, that could make my play going forward a lot easier.
And we can't see if Gukesh is at the board at this moment. I feel like they've been both spending so much time at the board, even when it's not their turn, and very little time in these rest rooms that they have, like, not rest room, that's not the right word.
I called it break room just to avoid having to say rest room.
Okay, fine. These break rooms that they are sitting, like, they're both sitting at the board, and I think that's so exhausting to me. I feel like I need to walk around a bit, especially when you're playing classical chess. Like, you can't sit there for 7 hours and face the same person thinking about chess moves. They don't take any breaks.
I said that on one of the previous games, and then I saw someone in the comments being like, well, maybe they're just better than you. Maybe they're able to concentrate better than you. And I think for sure that is definitely true. But also compared to the players at their level, compared to a Karana, a Carlsen, a Nakamura, you would never see those guys sitting at the board in such long periods of time as Gukesh and Ding is doing. So, I mean, I guess you have to say that in terms of their ability to kind of power through and go through these games without needing distractions to kind of rest their head with other thoughts during the game, they are better than Carlsen, than Nepomniachtchi. The Carlsen-Nepomniachtchi match became infamous for the players never sitting at the board at all, and this is just the complete opposite to that.
Have you seen these, like, kind of TikTok/reels of chess openings that they have? Like, they have some AI generated music and the board is like zooming in and out on different squares. It's kind of like brain rot chess preparation. Like, that's what I'm wondering, if that's going to be the future. That's how people are going to remember openings, or maybe I'm mostly speaking about myself. Well, I feel like these guys wouldn't need that. They wouldn't need these, like, very intense music chess openings, because they're so concentrated. I don't understand how they can do it.
Yeah, no, me neither. I've been doing some commentary on Alexandra Botez, and I've been telling her I think you should walk around more, because my opinion to her was that it's detrimental to sit at the board for such prolonged time because it doesn't give your head some rest and some alternate thoughts, or whatever you want to call it. But apparently there are certain players who are just able to sit at the board nonstop, and I can only admire it and say that I am not one of those people. I could never do what these guys are doing.
And now we're only 30 seconds until Ding has spent 30 minutes on this single move. And we've seen him spend upwards of 40. So it's not a record just yet. But what would you say is the amount of time, if somebody spent that on a move, that it would be completely unacceptable no matter what the situation was? Where do you draw the
Well,
line?
I will say that a thing where I am definitely just as good or bad as these players, I can spend extraordinary amounts of time on a single move. And that is the chess player mind. You know, we get fascinated by some calculations or by some assessments, or we get stuck, which is not a good feeling, but it definitely happens quite a few times. And then your clock just keeps ticking and ticking and ticking. I don't think this spending this amount of time in itself is a terrible thing from Ding. But in the context of him losing on time 2 games ago and getting himself into time pressure repeatedly so far in a match that only has lasted 4 games to this point, I think it's not good. So even though, yeah, thinking this along individually is not terrible, but when he's been making a habit of it over the last couple of days, I think it needs to be addressed and he needs to speed up.
Well, let's see. Now that he has passed 30 minutes, he's at 31 and a half. And I guess this is an important situation to, as you've shown very many different variations. You know, like if you have to summarize everything, what do you think Ding will play? And
Well,
do you think it's the best move?
Ding, to summarize, I would start at the very basics. Ding needs to bring his rook into the game. So how do you get the rook in? Well, first you need to get rid of the bishop for the rook to pass the bishop on its way into the middle. There are 2 different directions for the bishop, to the right and to the left. If you want to go in this direction, moving the pawn up, continuing with the bishop out, and then the rook come in here to the middle, is a 4-move plan. You got to move the king, you got to move the rook, the pawn, and the bishop. And then the question becomes, what kind of problems can Gukesh create in those 4 moves? We haven't really studied that, but that is why Ding is spending so much time. He needs to figure out, can I do that unpunished? Alternately, the bishop has to go in the other direction. But then there's the problem that the knight is currently blocking the bishop's path. And if the knight moves away from the protection of its buddy, then the trade of bishop versus knight at this point, where Ding only has the pawn to recapture, giving himself an isolated doubled pawn, is catastrophic.
And now we do have the move from Ding, and he played his pawn to h6, we have also spoken quite a bit about chasing the bishop away and kind of saving that pawn. Is that the main point of that move, or is it just to chase the bishop?
Yeah, no, it's saving the pawn, because there were some situations where the bishop's diagonal was able to capture that pawn. To be fair, I think this pawn move is something Ding would do regardless of whether he wanted to use the bishop to the right or bishop to the left strategy. So we haven't really learned anything more about what plan Ding is going to utilize. But to continue the argument that we were making, so if the knight moves away immediately, that will allow the bishop to trade for the other black knight at a moment when the pawn has to recapture. And having the pawns like this is called isolated doubled pawns. And this is not a good thing. The pawns are not working together on this king side of the board. They cannot defend each other. and there are squares in black's half of the board that black is struggling to keep control of as a consequence of these pawns being suboptimally placed. So Ding cannot, whatever he does, he cannot allow this trade between the bishop and knight to happen at a moment where the other knight is not available to come and recapture. So that means this knight cannot move away to help out the bishop before the other knight moves away as well. And this is why we've been talking about moving the knight out to the edge of the board, which is one of the moves that Ding is considering right now. And the point of that is that after the knight moves out of the way, the other knight can also move safely, which in turn opens up for the bishop, which in turn opens up for the rook. And what we can tell from these plans is that both plans, both pawn up, bishop out, king away, rook into the middle, that is 4 moves. But then knight out to the side, knight out afterwards, bishop out, king over. Actually, rook. This was 5 moves. So the knight out to the edge of the board plan is 1 move slower than pushing the pawn up on the side of the board. But it creates a different constellation of the pieces. And so Ding has to decide whether he wants to go for the slower plan because how the pieces end up being placed there is more advantageous to him, or if he wants to go with the faster plan. And, well, just the fact that the fast plan takes 4 moves is quite scary in and of itself. Because that means Ding is having a lot of time to create pressure and create threats against Ding's position. And so I guess the simplest summary of why Ding is spending so much time in this phase of the game is that having played a risky opening, Ding is still under pressure. He was hoping that his pre-game preparation was going to solve his issues, but as of yet, he is out of his preparation. He's thinking on his own, and he's dealing with some scary ideas.
And what you said earlier, Ludvig, about the fact that this h6 move that he just did, chasing the bishop, that was probably going to be a part of his plan no matter which one he went for. But now he's spending 4 minutes again after just spending more than 30. Shouldn't he have kind of concluded this on his previous move?
I think so. But if there's anything we've learned over the first couple of games in this match, Ding likes to spend his time. And maybe there has been another concern that has popped up in his mind that he needs to recheck his calculations. The good news for Ding, however, is that the chess engines do consider this position balanced, even if from a human perspective, it's a lot more pleasant to be white and have all your pieces involved in the game than it is being black. So if Ding finds the right plan, we can logically deduce from the chess engine's valuations that he will be okay. If he doesn't find the right plan, this could be very scary, considering there's he's going to take quite a bit of time to get his rook involved from the corner of the board.
We have a poll on our YouTube stream right now, Ludvig, where the question is, would you rather play white or black in this position? Do you want to guess how many % of our viewers would rather be white?
I think there are more Indian chess fans than there are Chinese. And I think the neutrals will agree with me when I say the objectively correct answer to this is the white pieces, because you are struggling to get your forces into the game. So I would say it's 90% who
Oh,
would
wow.
prefer being Gukesh here.
They also had the option of answering that they didn't have a preference.
Oh,
So maybe I should have told you that. But it was, at the current time, it is 75% of our viewers saying that they would rather play with the white pieces, 13% would like to be black, and 12% have no preference. But yeah, I guess everyone is kind of also being colored by your opinion here, Ludvig, that the fact that white is the one who has pressure, we keep talking about how Ding has to play some moves to kind of solve his problems.
just getting his pieces into the game, simply.
So we will see. I can see that the top computer move is to advance this B pawn that many of our viewers also have been mentioning. This is one of the plans you have showed quite a bit, Ludvig.
Yeah.
Moving the pawn, moving the bishop, and then moving the king, and then moving the rook. So we're prepared for this one.
Yeah.
We're ready for that. And then the question becomes, what is Gukesh supposed to be doing in the meantime?
Yeah, that's a completely different kind of worms, isn't it? Yeah, the good thing for Gukesh is that he doesn't need to make a decision until Ding is the one with the choice right now. And Gukesh doesn't need to spend any energy. He can just choose to chill out and wait for Ding to get this 50-50 decision over with. But if I know Gukesh right, and I think I do, then he's sitting at the board calculating everything as we speak. Even if Ding now, well, he kind of cheated because he made
He played
move.
the knight to h5.
Knight out to the edge of the board. Very interesting plan, in my opinion, from Ding. So he's getting ready to do what we defined as the slower plan, where it's going to take a bit of extra time to get the rook in from the corner. But the advantage of this knight moving out on the edge of the board is that it prevents Gukesh from making a trade between the two bishops, because Ding having his pawns on the light squares in the center of the board, he really wants to keep the dark squared bishops, because the dark squared bishop and the pawns on the light squares, they're both diagonal pieces. And so when they work together, the bishop is taking control of the dark squares and the pawns are taking control of the light squares. This is also the long-term plan of now the other knight is free to move. The other knight is no longer constricted to defending its buddy over here. And the knight can move away, giving space for the bishop. And then finally the rook coming in with the king moving to the side at some point there as well. So my impression is that this is potentially worth the extra move that Ding is now spending in order to get his rook out from the center of the board.
What do you think of all the arrows that I drew to illustrate the plan? Was that a terrible...
Well, the thing is, we're not sure where this black knight is going. And we talked about earlier the potential for rushing the pawns forward on the queen's side of the board. And it could be that if you move the knight over here, the knight is standing in the way of the pawns. And that's not something favorable that we want to have happening. So it could be that this black knight is headed to the left side instead, either, well, probably over here where the other knight came from. It wasn't that a knight was poorly placed on this square. That's not why we moved it away. It was just we needed to get this other knight out of the way so that the bishop could move in afterwards. So I'm not really sure which direction this knight is going. But other than that, I think the general, the premise of your arrows of getting the rook into the game is on the right track.
Yeah, what I wrote in the app was that he is getting ready to shuffle his knight out of the way for the undeveloped bishop, which in turn is blocking the rook, and that this is a slow plan, but if he succeeds, he will have few issues left in the position. And then I added a comment after what you just said that we don't know yet which direction the knight that is blocking the bishop will go, but the arrows show one of the potential plans that Ding could be considering.
That seems fair to me.
So now, hopefully, these arrows will not confuse people. But I think in a way it's important to show like all of these moves. We have we know now the 4 moves maybe, or we have a suggestion of the 4 moves that Ding could be planning to do. And Gukesh also knows this. So now the question is, what is he going to spend 4 turns on in the meantime?
Yeah, and that's a big question for him. I guess the most... Yeah, no, it's a big question. I mean, if anything, I think Gukesh now could be tempted at changing his direction. Because if he feels like it's now difficult to make progress. So one of the other things I want to point out that can be a benefit with this knight moving out to the edge of the board. Now, if the rook comes in, check on the king, king moves away, the knight moves into the middle of the board. We move our knight away to open up for the bishop. Normally, what we've been doing as a plan for white in these kind of circumstances is that the pawn moves 2 steps forward to reinforce the protection of white's knight in the middle of the board. However, now that might be a mistake on account of the knight being able to come in and capture said pawn. So maybe the black knight is doing 2 things in that it's both preventing the white pawn from pushing forward and also preventing the white bishop from moving back. And what I'm thinking is maybe now Gukesh changes direction completely and starts moving with his pawn on the queen side of the board instead, and tries to kind of say, okay, I was attacking over here, but now I'm going to start an attack over here, and you can't know I'm doing both things at the same time, and so I'm trying to stress you from two sides of the board simultaneously. And the obvious response to something like this would be to get your pawn 2 steps forward to defend your most forward pawn. However, then the white pawn would push forward on the edge of the board, attacking the black defender pawn. And if you try to make one of these pawn chains with the pawns defending each other up the board, now you're in big trouble because white captures the black pawn and the black pawn cannot make the recapture due to the fact that the 2 rooks are still on the edge of the board, allowing the white rook to come in and capture blacks. And one of the reasons I find this really interesting is I like the composure that Gukesh has shown in not moving his rook to the center of the board. Part of the reason I'm thinking that he could play this pawn to b3 and create a new flank of attack is because I've noticed that Gukesh had the ability to move his rook into the middle, giving a check down on the black king, but he has chosen not to do so. And one of the reasonings for that choice may be what we just analyzed with creating a new flank on the attack.
I guess that's also like a very natural move for many people is just when they see an opportunity to play a check. And I mean, it looks good to bring your rook towards the center of the board. But then it's interesting to note that in this case, you're just kind of helping. One of the moves that Ding wants to do is to move his king. So you don't want to help him. You want to sabotage him.
Well, but at the same time, moving the rook into the center is probably one of your top moves as well. So you have to balance the fact that, do I want to do this move, but then I'm helping the opponent, but I'm also helping myself? And I think what Gukesh did is the flexibility. He keeps the option of going into the center with a rook, but he also keeps the option of keeping the rook on this side of the board to create attacks there. But now he needs to decide. So this is an interesting moment in that regard, that in this situation, Gukesh needs to decide where does he want his rook. Either he has to move the rook into the middle now, or he needs to start making these queenside threats or intentions. Actually, now I'm thinking, what about the move pawn to a4? Speaking of, the pawn 2 steps forward on the side of the board.
Yeah, that would sabotage that plan.
It would sabotage the plan of pushing the pawn 2 steps forward on the queen side, but it would also sabotage the path that we were considering with the knight moving to the right, because then the pawn could continue forward and chase the knight, and the knight only has one square to go to, but then it's back to standing in the path of black's bishop. So pawn 2 steps forward on the side is interesting. Well, then the knight doesn't really have a choice, right? It has to move in this direction instead. And then maybe you make them... The problem is you're only preventing half of Ding's plans. And as long as Ding has a backup plan in the opposite direction, I'm not sure this pawn push on the side of the board really accomplishes that much. And it must be said, in this match, pushing the pawn forward on the side of the board has really been Ding's
Yeah, he
thing,
does that every single game.
more than Gukesh's.
So now it's going to be interesting to see what Gukesh will do. I have checked with our app the top engine move. You haven't mentioned it yet, I think.
Okay.
So you've discussed playing the pawn here to challenge this area.
I mean, I've discussed quite a few moves, I thought. Pawn
And you've
here,
also discussed here.
pawn here, and rook here.
Yeah, it was none of those moves.
Okay.
Our viewers are seeing it. They might be checking in the app, to be fair. You don't have a computer. That's important for everyone to know.
I can check in the app as well.
No, you don't make a guess. That's more fun.
I have no guesses. Maybe here? No.
Okay, you could check in the app if you want, or I could just.
Well,
tell you.
I'm on the feeder broadcast, which we're looking at, because they have the pictures of the players. They're analyzing this move, pawn 2 steps forward in front of the white king, which I guess could make a lot of sense in terms of Gukesh has only 4 moves to create big threats against the black position, and then you got to do something very, very quickly. But I'm not really a fan of this move because it allows the black knight to continue further forward into white's position. So I'm not sure I really believe in that move.
No, it's not that move either. It's moving the knight to f1, moving the knight towards the king side of the board.
Yeah, no, that was the actually. In fairness, that was going to be my final suggestion. I
Sure
think.
thing, sure.
Yeah, no, it really was because this knight, it makes a lot of sense trying to get it up in the middle of the board and attacking one of Black's major weaknesses, which is the pawn on d5. We talked about earlier that normally in these exchange French situations, Black creates a barrier of his pawns protecting up the board. But the major problem of having been so aggressive with the pawn play, like Ding has, is that the one sitting in the center of the board now cannot be defended by other pawns currently. So knight to f1 makes a lot of sense in that regard. The only thing is that when the black knight moves away, in order to give space for the bishop to get into the game, that also offers protection to the pawn that white would be targeting. So with that in mind, I don't really see what Gukesh would accomplish in doing this, because I mean, even after this, the bishop can come in. Like in the next two moves, the most logical moves to make for Ding in the next couple of moves is giving lots of protection to the pawn that this knight maneuver targets. So it doesn't feel to me like the knight maneuver is really accomplishing much, because the moves black wants to play, the moves Ding wants to play anyway, just very firmly addresses the threats that white is making.
Gukesh has now spent 15 minutes on this move. So we've reached that kind of same rhythm that we have in every game now, that first they're playing very fast in the opening, and then they reach this kind of difficult situation where one player has some problems they need to kind of iron out, and both players spend a lot of time, and then if they manage, it's headed towards a draw. But if they don't manage, which we have seen in 2 of the games so far, then one of the players will win. So this is really like the most exciting part, where we're kind of waiting to see, will they figure this out? What do you think?
I like Ding's plan. I think Ding has come up with a good concept here for how to organize his pieces. And yeah, sure, he's behind on getting his pieces into the game, but he'll probably be able to do it, get it done. So right now, I'm pretty optimistic on Ding's behalf to get a draw out of this game. One of the things I am wondering, but I'm trying to figure out how to organize it. Maybe let's start with this knight maneuver move. That kind of messes up my idea later on. Okay, let me just try and convey what I'm trying to. So if the rook now comes in, check on the king moves out of the way, and then the knight pushes forward in the middle. My concern about pushing this knight forward immediately is that if either the knight or the bishop captures whites, then black will get access to this square, and you can utilize that square to push pieces further up the board. Now that I think about it, I probably wanna do the trade between the knights, and then move the bishop to a decent placement. Something like this, I feel, is acceptable for black. But on the other hand, then white can maneuver their knight into the center of the board. So for argument's sake, let's say that Ding does not go for the trade between these two knights and instead moves his knight into the center of the board as we have analyzed before. And I put this position on the board previously, and I said one of the good things about this is that now the pawn cannot push forward to the f4 square, because if it does, then that pawn will be captured by the black knight. However, while I was saying that, I was kind of making the realization that this could be a good idea for white regardless, because it could open up an area of attack, give away a pawn in order for the rook to point down towards the black king. So some kind of sacrifice here involving this pawn.
We have a move, Ludvig.
Could be interesting.
And though you were rewarding him for not playing this move for a while, keeping his options open, he has now played his rook to the center, given a check, and Ding responded immediately, of course, moving his king out of the way.
So now Gukesh has committed himself to whatever trouble he's creating for black over the next couple of moves. It's going to be focused on this king's side of the board. He's not opening a new flank of attack on the opposite side. He's just focused through the center. And the only thing that makes sense to me now is pushing the knight forward in the middle. And actually, I'm starting to appreciate more the position for white should the knights be traded in the middle of the board. Because even though black gets a really good positioning for their bishop, I'm also really happy for white, who gets a knight pushing in to the center of the board. And if the knight gets here, this is a square where there are no black pawns able to chase the knight away, which usually is a sign that the knight is going to be very, very well placed there. So I think maybe, I'm not sure still, but I think maybe Gukesh can now push the knight forward in the center, because the trade between the knights, which was my initial instinct as something white should not allow to happen, I'm slowly changing my mind and considering that this is okay for white to allow. And if Ding decides not to capture the white knight, now we can start exploring something like the pawn stepping 2 squares forward, allowing itself to be captured, but then giving potential for attacks down this new open area as white's pawn was taken off the board.
Oh, but Ludvig, interestingly enough, now there is a move that we have discussed earlier, not in this variation, that you were the one to bring up. The pawn in front of the king could suddenly rush out and attack the knight on the side of the board. That is what the computer is saying in our Take app. When you add the engine moves, clicking on the little arrow with stars, then it reveals that is the best move for Gukesh. Do you think he would play something like that now?
I think it makes logical sense in that Ding is only like a couple of steps away from getting his rook in from the corner of the board. So Gukesh needs to do something extraordinary and quickly before Ding manages to coordinate his pieces. That being said, this pawn advance, I mean, number one, you can't just move the knight back again and I don't really see a major problem with. I guess then the major problem is now you cannot move the other knight. Okay, yeah, I don't want to move the knight back because there was a reason I moved it forward to begin with. So if the pawn pushes forward to attack the black knight, the major issue is that the knight can continue forward. And now, with the white pawn having been so aggressive against the knight on the previous move, now this knight is on a square where there are no white pawns that can chase it away. And normally I would say that's the end of that. But if the chess engines is recommending this, then probably we should investigate even further. But already getting the knight into a great positioning seems very nice for Ding. So I guess the idea is that now the bishop can move one step back. That was one of the good things about putting the knight on the edge for Ding to begin with, that the knight was restricting the bishop's movements. So using the pawn to kick the knight probably had to do with the bishop wanting to go one step back without being captured by the black pieces.
I'm checking your work here, Ludvig, not to be annoying, because I have the computer here, you don't. But that is a good continuation.
And now I guess we move the knight into the... Well, we're continuing our plan, right? This is what we've been doing for the last period of time. We want to move the knight so that we open up for the bishop. And as an added bonus, now both the knight and the bishop are both threatening towards one of white's pawns. And the only way of dealing with this threat is by making a counter threat against the black knight. So then the white knight would move up in the center of the board, because now the white knight is preventing the black bishop from protecting the black knight behind it. But then Ding can protect his knight by moving his pawn 2 steps forward. And then I guess Gukesh can protect his pawn. I mean, this is certainly making the position very, very interesting. But it seems to me with a knight pretty well defended inside the opponent's half, this should be quite okay for Ding. Although, is it Ding's move now? Yeah, so Ding moves his bishop out. I guess now we can have this maneuver of the knight into the middle of the board. And then the knight is kind of eyeing the opportunity to push forward into black's half in the similar manner to how the black knight has gone into white's half of the board.
This looks very chaotic.
It's definitely chaotic and maybe also good for Gukesh.
Gukesh has now spent almost 8 minutes thinking, and he is about to go into less time than Ding on his clock. So both are at least spending their time quite equally today, I would say.
Yeah, but this is a big moment. If the best move is pushing the pawn 2 steps forward in front of the king, that is going to demand some calculations. Normally, moving your pawns in front of your king is a risky move because it exposes your king to attacks. But considering that the queens were traded off at a very early stage of this game, the main concern about the pawn push is not that the king then ends up in trouble. It's more so that after the pawn push, the black knight will be able to go into a square where there are no white pawns able to chase the knight away from that placement. But then again, maybe the bishop can take care of business.
So,
Yeah, no, it's a very, very committal move. But at the same time, I think it's in many ways a logical move. Because Gukesh knows if I'm going to get anything out of this game, I need to strike and I need to make threats before Ding completes his plan. And frankly, Ding is quite close to getting the maneuvering that he's looking for.
we're having some questions in the chat saying that they want to know more about this computer evaluation. They can't see the bar that well. And what I usually do as a trick is look at like the center line of the board and then see whose side is it over on. And we actually haven't discussed this, Ludvig, but if you click in the app, you can click where it says balanced, and then you can see what the computer evaluation is, which is minus 0.1. So it's actually, for the first time today, I think, over on Ding's side. And you can see that here on our screen as well. It's very, very little, but it's just barely over on Ding's side there. So he's actually gotten out of the opening so far pretty well, I would say.
I think it's too early to call, based on the fact that the suggestions and the analysis we're doing right now is... it's quite dangerous. And Gukesh does push the pawn in front of his king 2 steps forward. And maybe the chess engines feel like this is advantageous for Ding very, very, very slightly. But there's no doubt in my mind that it's Gukesh setting the stage. It's Gukesh making the decision to put pressure in towards Ding. And I think we also saw this in the previous game where Gukesh had the white pieces, where the chess engines were in Ding's favor for a little moment, but Ding was under pressure and didn't manage to deal with the pressure, made a big mistake, and lost his bishop, and with it, the game.
Is it fair to call this a risky move?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so, because...
An ambitious move?
Ambitious, definitely, certainly, very ambitious. But risky, I think it's not really risky because it's creating so many threats towards Ding. So you're kind of exposing your pawn to potential attacks, but you're exposing Ding's pieces to bigger attacks. And even though, even if the bar is very slightly in Ding's favor, I think it's Ding who has to be careful now. It's Ding who has to be very accurate in the continuation, as now he's going to feel the pressure of Gukesh's initiative, and Gukesh is now essentially playing with a rook and bishop more. I shouldn't. Yeah, when I do this, we need to switch cameras. Gukesh is essentially playing with a rook and bishop more because the rook and bishop for black is stuck in the corner of the board. However, in 3 moves or however long it takes to get these pieces into the game, then you're not going to have that sort of temporary material advantage. So Gukesh strikes while he has more pieces involved in the game, which makes perfect sense. But of course, it's very spectacular the way in which he's doing this.
I have now highlighted those pieces as well in our analysis in the app, describing the pieces that Ding has on his queen side. They are not participating in the game, and that Gukesh, he's trying to create chaos before they enter the game. So we were talking about earlier how Ding had a 4 or 5 move plan, and now he hasn't had time to finish that plan. So now Gukesh is going for something. Can we expect a long thinking break from Ding here?
Well, yeah, I think so. Because the obvious choice now is to move the knight forward into white's half. But the problem of this decision is that it allows the white bishop to push one step back, and the bishop will then threaten against the knight, but the knight cannot move because of the black bishop behind it that is frankly undefended and a potential problem for Ding here. So if he moves forward, he has to be very careful in his assessment of these two bishops pointing against each other, and whether black can sustain a future for his knight inside white's half. On the other hand, should Ding go back now, then we would be basically just reminding people of what we said an hour ago. Because an hour ago, we were saying that this knight needed to move because otherwise the other knight wouldn't be able to get out of the way of the bishop without a trade between the white bishop and the black knight happening, after which the black pawn formation has been irreversibly damaged for the long term. So going back it feels wrong considering that he just moved to the edge of the board from that square to begin with, but it completely depends on whether it's safe to go forward. If it's not safe to go forward, then he has to go back. But he doesn't want to go back.
I'm now posting a photo that we have of the players. We know that we can't show that on this stream. So if you do want to see what the players look like and how they're sitting and how their facial expressions are, you can see that in the app once I have uploaded this photo. I would say both of them, they are always sitting at the board. They're always looking pretty concentrated, but Ding in particular, he sometimes looks a bit more nervous and affected, while Gukesh, he has like his eyes closed a lot. He's kind of trying to keep in kind of like Zen mode, while Ding, I think he looks pretty nervous all the time, and I'm so amazed that he's able to sit at the board for hours on end and seem like this nervous. Do you ever get distracted, Ludvig, if you can tell like your opponent's body language is saying a lot about how they're feeling?
No, not their body language necessarily, but there's a lot of chess players who have certain idiosyncrasies in play, and that, yeah, you tend to notice that a little bit, but maybe not so much whether they're comfortable or not.
And now I'm also checking.
Yeah, no, I'm watching the FIDE broadcast, watching Ding think, and I'm also watching them analyze a really interesting move, which is the pawn. So I just mentioned two moves because I am a man of simple means. I see my knight under attack, and I'm thinking I got to move the knight. But they are analyzing an amazing possibility to move the pawn 2 steps forward and do a counterattack on white's bishop. And this, now the bishop cannot move backwards because then the knight manages to capture the bishop, which is what we set out to do when we moved that knight to the edge of the board anyway. But the problem of attacking an opposing piece while they're attacking one of yours is that sometimes the opponent will then capture your one, saying that I was going to lose my bishop anyway. And then after you take their bishop, they take your knight. And now you've lost a pawn. But not only that, white has a pawn that's trying to become a new queen along the edge of the board. And if I had my rook involved in the game, I could move this rook over here and it would be no issue stopping the advance of this pawn. But because black's pieces are stuck on the opposite corner, this plan of pushing the pawn forward becomes a lot more venomous to deal with.
And Ding has played his knight forward as we have been.
Okay. Yeah, no, because that was a spectacular idea to just not move the knight at all. And moving the knight forward is... I'm amazed he played this so quickly when he's been so slow in many of his other decisions.
He spent 8.5 minutes.
He spent 40 minutes on this other thing he did. 8 minutes in comparison is nothing. And this is a very critical move because now the white bishop will point towards the knight. The knight cannot move away because then there's a black bishop that's undefended behind the black knight. So this becomes what's known as a pin on the knight. The knight cannot move. And sometimes there's also this situation, we talked about this in the analysis earlier, of the white knight pushing forward into the middle of the board and interrupting the protection from the bishop on the knight, which is cutting this knight off at a point where it's inside enemy territory and could get itself in trouble. I was analyzing pawn to g5 to defend this, but then, white's aggression with that pawn is justified if black has to play in a similar manner to counter it. So I'm surprised. I don't know. I'm surprised that the chess engines are not more optimistic on Gukesh's behalf, because right now I feel like he's making some easy threats in towards Ding's position. And Gukesh indeed has moved his bishop back. That was the whole point. That was the whole point of pushing this pawn forward, that you chase the black knight away from controlling this square that now the bishop chose to go to.
Yeah, and there we have it on our board as well. The bishop pins that knight. However, Ludvig, could that knight move, give a check on the king, and trade those bishops? Or would... Oh, that didn't happen. Let's stick to what's happening. Ding moves immediately again.
And he moves the knight not towards the middle of the board, like I was maybe expecting, but he moves out on the side, like we did with the arrows. Our arrows are avenged that the knight did move out of the way just to the side of the board, opening up for the bishop. And look where it's opening up for the bishop against. Ding now creates a threat, a discovered attack, moving the knight, but actually threatening a pawn with his bishop that Gukesh now has to deal with. And Gukesh actually doesn't have any good ways of defending this pawn. And he's going to need to start counterattacking. And I'm expecting Gukesh to move his knight forward into black's half. But the key thing here is that the knight is interrupting the defense between the bishop and the black knight. So now the black knight is without a defender.
Well, this is getting quite complicated now.
Yeah, no, this is getting very tricky.
But Ding really did manage to play those last two moves quite quickly. He only spent 22 seconds. So he had already planned that he was moving this knight over here. And he's attacking a pawn. Gukesh has to deal with that threat in some way. Some of our viewers are saying, why would you go to b6? A lot of our viewers were not rooting for this move from Ding. But the computers seem to think it's still perfectly balanced.
There's a couple of reasons. Number one, if the knight now moves forward, one of the solutions for dealing with this is now capturing the knight. If Ding had moved his knight to the other side of the board, capturing the knight would not be an available move, because then as the pawn recaptures, the pawn is attacking this knight and the bishop is attacking the other knight. And you cannot save both of them at the same time. So by moving the knight further away from the action, Ding is giving himself the opportunity to potentially trade in the center. And what could be the advantage of this? Well, because then the knight could go check the king would have to move out of the way, and then the bishop is able to capture a pawn while simultaneously keeping the knight defended. And here, Ding, as far as I can tell, has safely captured the white pawn without Gukesh having an immediate counter to punish this. But it seems risky because he puts a lot of his pieces out here on the edge of the board, and he's given away his dark squared bishop in this analysis, which means now black has serious issues controlling the dark squares on the board, considering that his pawns in the middle are on the light squares. So this is kind of desperate, but could work. Something to consider at least for Gukesh before he makes his move in the current situation. So that could be a point. But also another point could be that when the knight moves forward now in the middle, if Ding chooses to use his pawn to defend the knight, now he reserves the possibility of pushing his pawn forward and attacking white's knight. Whereas if the black knight had been on this side instead, then the black knight would blockade the pawn's ability to chase the powerful white knight in the center of the board away. So my point is, there are some reasonings for why the knight could be better off further away from the action, not because it's well placed here, it's not, but because it's kind of avoiding being attacked. There are no white pieces on this side of the board, which is why I was skeptical of moving the knight over here to begin with. But there are also advantages to there not being any white pieces here, which means that it's now not getting attacked.
All right, then. So now, how is Gukesh supposed to save this pawn, then, that's under threat, that you've showed us a little bit?
Well, if he wants to save the...
But didn't you show us that that would win a pawn in the end?
I did, didn't I? Well, yeah. Well, sometimes when you push your pawn 2 steps forward in front of your own king, you cannot expect that pawn to survive.
So you're just going to give up? Our viewers want us to play the pawn another square forwards to g5. What do you think of that?
Oh, I don't like that. I really don't like that. Because now if the pawn captures the pawn, Now, white's two remaining pawns on this side of the board, they're not next to one another, and they cannot defend one another. And I always become very, very critical of such lack of cooperation between pawns. I do see that then the knight would be able to move up and actually threaten a checkmate.
Whoa.
If the knight comes in, check on the king would move, and then for our little checkmate graphic, the rook comes in, check on the king, the knight is protected, and the knight helps out the rook for the checkmate.
And Gukesh has played this move to g5. So this checkmate could happen, Ludvig. Maybe?
I will say that Ding actually fell for a very basic checkmate in 2 moves against Magnus in the Norway chess tournament this year. But I don't see him falling for this one. Yeah, but I specifically said I thought that was a rubbish move, didn't I?
So what do we say about it now? I mean, the computer is still saying it's
I still
balanced.
say it's really bad.
So you don't like this move because it splits up the pawns.
Well, no, there's other options as well. So I want also to emphasize that this pawn has not been saved. If now knight comes in and gives a check on the king moves away, white's bishop attacks towards black's bishop, we can capture, but then after white takes the bishop back, then my knight can capture the white pawn, and I have an extra pawn. So, number one, I'm not even sure that pawn push saved the pawn to begin with. But also, there's an interesting detail in this analysis. Let's go back to the current situation on the board, because I think I may have discovered Gukesh's trick. If the knight gives a check on the king and the king moves, if now I have to deal with the bishops, so I make the trade between the bishops. And I think what Gukesh has planned is pawn takes pawn. Choosing not to save the bishop that's under attack, because if the bishop escapes and runs back, then the pawn continues along the edge of the board, and there's no way for Ding to stop that pawn from becoming a new queen. So we're discovering some of Gukesh's trickery here. He wants to sacrifice his bishop in order to get a new queen down the edge of the board. Which makes me go back to my first line of thinking, which was pawn takes pawn. And now, obviously, Gukesh would need to recapture that. Oh, he's so sneaky. He's so sneaky. Maud, I was now thinking I can go with my knight.
And the capture has happened on the board.
Okay. I was planning to go with my knight to give a check on the king and attack the white knight, knowing that my knight was protected by the bishop and that if all the trades happen, it's going to be a draw. But Gukesh is such a sneaky guy. Because here, instead of trading the knights, Gukesh will just move his king. And now white's bishop is threatening black's bishop. White's knight is threatening black's knight, but black's knight is also threatening the white knight. And so if we can trade the bishops and then take the knight, black will be up by an entire knight. However, if the bishop tries to trade with white's bishop, then instead of getting distracted by all this area, Then Gukesh would go with a knight forward, check on the king, and another checkmate alert
We've used that
on
so
the
many
analysis
times.
board with the rook coming in. He's genuinely trying to put up this checkmate, but he's doing it in much fancier ways than what I initially illustrated.
Okay. Well, this is cool. It's very rare that we get to see a checkmate on the board in a World Championship match ever. But as you say, Ding has missed this kind of...
It's not going to happen. Don't even try to build up. I mean, it's not going to happen. Ding is obviously gonna see this, but it's nice to get to illustrate some of the dangerous intentions the players have with their moves.
Oh, did we miss a takes? No, we didn't. There's been 2 takes now, and there probably isn't going to be one in this move. No, Ding doesn't have anything to capture. Our viewers were alerting us that we had to be attentive to the fact that there could be a take situation, which we also have a button for, but there are no more captures for Ding on this move.
But my first instinct when I saw this pawn push from Gukesh earlier was that cannot Ding just play his pawn one step forward and attack the knight while also creating an escape square for his king. And now maybe Gukesh is planning to move his bishop inside black's half. Currently, that bishop can be captured by the knight. The pawn can capture the white knight. But the thing is, if the knight gets captured, the rook comes in for the checkmate. And now I'm having so many checkmates, I'm not even using the okay.
I did it for you.
And also, if the knight captures the bishop, then that opens up between these other bishops. Coming in, check on the king. King moves back. Rook comes in. Knight has to block. And then the rook comes in for another check. You're really enjoying yourself right now.
Yeah, but it's fun. I mean, we don't get to see that many times in like Grandmaster games that there are these kind of understandable threats. I mean, it's not that far off. And also, it's interesting to note that probably Ding is seeing these checkmates in his head. And don't you think that that will maybe affect him a little bit? Like, you're playing a World Championship match and you're like, whoa, if I make 2 mistakes,
it did affect him, but it only affected him into playing a nice, solid move. Ding moves his bishop one step forward, which takes control of the white rook's opportunity to go in and make all of these checkmates that we've been illustrating. And with that move, it was that easy. Now there are no more checkmates. And the position we're left with is one where Gukesh has a slightly worse pawn formation because his 2 remaining pawns they're not next to one another, and so they cannot protect each other, which is a slight detriment to Gukesh. So if now I was asked, would you rather be white or black?
Oh,
I would very firmly say I prefer black in this position.
maybe we need to ask our viewers again then, because last time 75% wanted to be white.
And I was in that percentage.
So you've changed your mind. So the main things that have changed since then.
The position has changed massively, right? And Ding, even though he spent a serious amount of time on that one decision, on how to execute his plan, I think he's been very successful. And, well, it's illustrated by the fact, of course, that he just moved his bishop mod. He's ready to get the rook into the middle of the board. He has completed his plan without Gukesh managing to create problems that cannot be dealt with.
While we were calculating checkmates, Ding was figuring out how to complete his plan, and he's almost done it now. He's done all of the moves we were discussing with our original arrow plan.
Yeah.
We're just missing this one. Is this what he's going to do next?
Yeah, I think so. Well, no, maybe.
No. Okay, you're a big
He
fan.
probably wants to move his pawn forward to chase. So, because this white knight is the only piece, white piece that's inside black's half. And also, in addition to pointing towards the knight, this would give the king a nice opportunity to improve its positioning as well. But the rook coming in here is also a nice plan B. The thing is, Ding has neutralized Gukesh's initiative so impressively that I'm not even sure he wants to have a trade between the rooks at this point, because maybe Ding may feel that he wants to keep the rooks on the board in order to put pressure on Gukesh. And Gukesh now voluntarily retreating, which is not a great sign for him.
Why did he do that? Because he was expecting the pawn move to come next move?
Yeah. And Gukesh wants to maneuver his knight into the middle of the board because he wants to break up the protection of the black bishop to the black knight. So he wants to make sure that these guys cannot be talking to one another. And now there is a possibility that we get a draw.
Okay.
Because now Ding can move his knight to give a check on the white king. And if the white king moves forward, then the knight can return, check on the king, and we can have a back and forth. However, I think Gukesh would not want the draw here. I think he would just move his king to the side, because then after the trade between the bishops, Ding would have problems getting his knight back into the game because his retreats have been taken control over by the white pieces. So probably Ding should find something better than this. And while pawn one step forward is screaming out to be played, because the pawn will then take control of the square that the white knight wanted to move to. So I'm expecting pawn one step forward here, taking control of the knight's intentions. And then I'm expecting pawn two steps forward on the side of the board, which is because Gukesh wants to prevent Ding from pushing his pawn forward and reinforcing the protection of the black knight. So this is my prediction. Pawn here, and it's pretty equal. No, I don't know. I would definitely prefer to be black, but maybe it's technically pretty equal. No, I like Ding's position.
Okay. Usually, this is the time when you start to eat some food. I don't know how you're doing. We don't have Kaya here today, so you're kind of on your own. If you do get hungry, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, no, I've been eating in the third hour, so
Oh, okay.
I'm good to go for another 40 minutes.
And then we should panic. Do you think this game will last another 40 minutes?
It depends on Ding's level of ambition. I think Gukesh right now is pretty ready to say this has been a failure. Let's make a draw. But Ding, I think, can reasonably try to go for the win without too much risk because he has the better... Like, Ding is the only one to have a knight inside the opponent's half, and Ding has this somewhat better pawn formation. I need to start using the terminology pawn islands. So pawn islands is basically how the pawns work together. And pawns that are standing next to one another is one pawn island. So this is one pawn island, these two pawns. And then these four pawns are also one pawn island because they're all next to one another without there being a lack of pawn in one of the files. However, Gukesh has also four pawns, one pawn island on the queen's side of the board. But because there's a hole in between the two remaining pawns he has on the opposite side, this means that this guy is an island on its own, and so is this guy. Had the white pawns been standing next to one another, this would be like maybe somewhat better for Gukesh because he's gotten his pieces into more active positions. But because the pawns are positioned where they are, I think the position is better for Ding, just almost solely based on the lack of cooperation now in White's pawns.
All right. Well, we are eagerly awaiting now to see what Ding will do. But Ding has been pretty okay with his time management, I would say, given the fact that he had 55 or so minutes before this move, and he's played 20 moves. So he's halfway to the 40 move mark.
I mean, he's slow, especially considering how much time he had.
Oh, Ding goes for the trade of rooks. He completes his plan.
To begin with. Yeah, no, Ding goes for the rook trade. And this is definitely not the most ambitious plan. I'm starting to think that maybe if Ding had pushed the pawn forward like I was suggesting, maybe there were some tricks with the knight moving into the middle anyway. And if the black pawn captured the knight, then the white pawn would recapture, and there's an attack on the bishop, there's an attack on the black knight, and if the black knight pushes forward, there are some situations where there would be an attack on the bishop and attack on the knight afterwards. I'm going through this very quickly because I think it's interesting to understand why Ding may have dismissed what looked like a very obvious move, because now, as Maud said, he is completing his plan of bringing the rook in from the corner of the board, but it's not entirely clear to me what his reaction is going to be should Gukesh move his knight forward in the middle of the board right now.
Are you asking me who has the computer evaluation?
No.
Well, you're getting the answer because Gukesh has now chosen to play that move.
Yeah, so now Gukesh is still making some threats on Ding. The knight has moved into the middle. It has disrupted the protection from the black bishop to the black knight. And if the black knight now moves out of the way, that would be a big mistake because it would allow the white knight in the center to capture the black bishop while giving a check on the king. The capture is not the bad thing because then after the black knights takes back, you're not losing the bishop. But as the white knight moved itself, it has opened up between the two bishops, allowing the white bishop to capture blacks and with it win the game because it's a check on the king, so black cannot capture white's rook.
But now it says that Ding is better, Ludvig. What is happening?
Yeah, so
Is this a mistake? Was this plan a mistake from Gukesh?
better.
Yeah, it says he's better. Ding is way better.
Oh, that's pretty significant.
What was the mistake then? Was it this trade of the knights? Because Ding chose to recapture the knight in the center with his bishop. So we had this move. And then Gukesh chose to recapture with his pawn. Also, this knight is not here. It's here.
So the chess engines are saying that pawn captures the black bishop in the middle was a mistake, and that Gukesh should have used the rook for that assignment instead. But it's not entirely clear to me why that is.
Okay, I'm alerting people. I'm alerting.
So the point is, after pawn captures, even though Ding now lost one of his two bishops, he is probably getting it back, because then on the next move, he jumped with his knight forward, attacking the white rook, attacking the white pawn to the right, and attacking the white pawn moving backwards. And Gukesh cannot save the rook, the pawn, and the pawn all at the same time unless he captures the black knight. And this leads to a very interesting situation where the black pawn is only 2 steps away now from becoming a new queen. It is behind enemy lines. But what's great about this pawn is that if white now tries to move their rook to take out the pawn before it does any more damage, then it's actually quite easy for Ding to give that pawn protection using his bishop. And also, the white bishop now, the one that's going to be remaining on the board, that bishop is not well placed whatsoever, because right now it's pointing into its own pawns in 3 directions of play. So Gukesh's bishop is not going to be a great participator here. And also this black knight on the side of the board, that knight could now become very good if it manages to advance in utilizing the fact that the black pawn moved out of the way, which also gives space for the knight to follow after the pawn and actually support the pawn in its desire to become a new queen.
Oh, and people in our chat are very excited to see that Ding is winning. Is the engine lying? How can you explain it to people? You know, why is Ding better in this position? You mentioned the bishop. Is that the reason?
It's a combination of several factors. He's definitely not winning. Let's just say that.
He's better.
He's better. He has the advantage. And that is based on the fact that in the current situation with the Black Knight having invaded into White's half, the Knight is causing so much trouble that the best move may be to capture said Knight. And then afterwards, the Black Pawn is dangerously close to becoming a new queen. And normally, when a pawn is this far up the board, it often lacks support of the other pieces to actually survive for much longer. But it's a combination of the pawn being close to becoming a new queen and Ding having the possibility of managing to keep that pawn defended for the foreseeable future.
All right, I am posting to the app then. We sent out a notification that there was a mistake made and a big change in the evaluation. And now I've written a little summary of all those reasons you just described as to why Ding is better. And you said that he has the advantage, but maybe we need to... That it's too soon to say that he's winning, but that's how the people in our chat are reacting. Ding chilling, Ding winning. People are very impressed. And that Ding's strategy so far has been to draw with the white pieces and win with the black pieces. A bit early to say that now, but it is interesting that his strategy is kind of to just be awake and then strike when Gukesh plays too ambitiously. Is that a good way of saying it?
I mean, he's playing good moves, and I think the fact that his games with the white pieces has become a draw, that's also a credit to Gukesh, especially yesterday. I think Gukesh played an amazing game to defend as black, and that's I don't think it's conscious strategy from Ding that he's going for wins with black. It's just that it's also has to do with Gukesh is trying to play very solidly with the black pieces, and Gukesh plays more freely. He's going more for trying to find winning ideas and trying to create imbalance in the position when Gukesh has the white pieces. And so, for instance, I already said the pawn to g5 move, when Gukesh was creating a weakness in his pawn formation, already there I feel like he started to make a step in the wrong direction.
So there are two options, I guess, or actually, I'm not sure I understand one of the options. You mentioned that he could capture this knight, and we've looked at that. But I can see also in our app that the computer is suggesting that the rook go to this square and protect this pawn. Isn't that very weird?
Rook to b1, that does protect one of the pawns that were being attacked.
Yeah.
But it also abandons the protection of the pawn in the middle. But an argument that can be made, and an argument I made, was that Gukesh is suffering that his bishop is being blocked by his own pawns. So by allowing one of the pawns to be captured, Gukesh would then preserve the advantage he has in both the bishops remaining on the board, working together, while simultaneously opening up an easier path for this bishop to get involved moving forward. That being said, it is a pawn. And it is a major concession if you give away a pawn without like a clear reason for why you've done that. So yeah, Gukesh has found himself under pressure right now, and that is also visible on the current time situation, because before this move, Gukesh had an advantage on time, but now he's spent so much time that the advantage is in Ding's half, and Ding also has a much easier follow-up move than Gukesh. Because if Gukesh captures Ding's knight,
yeah,
then Ding will just recapture and take back the bishop. If Gukesh moves his rook forward to attack the knight and also keep the pawn in the middle protected, well, then Ding will capture the pawn on the side. And if the rook goes to protect the pawn over here, then the knight will capture in the middle. So no matter what Gukesh does now, Ding is going to be able to play an instant move in return, which is just going to pile on both the pressure on the clock and the psychological pressure for Gukesh.
And now we've received a very cool image of Gukesh sitting like very concentrated at the board. And ding, suddenly his body language has changed completely. He's no longer in this kind of stressed, forward-leaning pose. He's just sitting very calmly. Ding, chilling, as many people are calling it.
Yeah, that has become a meme.
Yeah,
Have you seen the pictures?
I've seen a lot of
on
memes of
Reddit?
Ding. He has a very memeable way of being, I guess, is the way to put it. I think it's very funny. I love the pictures of Ding like walking around alone in a hallway after he's lost and looking a bit like upset about that. And then I love it when Ding is like super happy after having won his first game in the World Championship, game 1. Yeah. And the contrast. He expresses a lot through his body language, I would say. And that makes him a meme. And even when he was eating walnuts in the first game, that was also like, why is that a big thing? And then he ate a banana like 2 days ago, and that was also being discussed a lot. I don't know. He's a funny guy.
But it's not Ding making,
No.
kind of giving attention to himself eating a banana. It is someone's fault to highlight these things to begin with, right?
Well, I appreciate it. I've now posted this picture of Ding chilling and Gukesh being stressed. That almost rhymes as well, so I felt like that was pretty clever wordplay from me there. What do you think? Look at this picture.
I don't think what you said just rhymed. That's for sure.
No, Ding and chilling doesn't rhyme either, but almost. Or actually it does rhyme, yeah. Whatever. But what do you think of this picture? Doesn't this tell you a lot? And for those that are wondering about this picture, you can see it in the app.
Download the app. We haven't done as much, I don't know, advertising for the app without Kaya being here. I think she needs to return to the studio to start chilling.
She is coming here soon.
Okay.
We'll see her soon.
And then she'll tell everyone to download the app where
She
we have
actually
failed.
responded to the push notification that I sent out. And she said, hooray, I'm happy I got a push notification. Something along those lines. So Kaya was now notified that this is an important moment in the match, or at least in this game, where Gukesh has a difficult decision to make. Ding has a very easy decision to make no matter what he is going to do. And we are eagerly awaiting. Gukesh, having spent now 13 minutes on this move, has to play another 17.
Can you hold the fort? I need to get some water.
Okay, can you also get water for me then?
Yeah.
Okay, while Ludvig is not here, let's see if there's any fun questions. A lot of people talking about Ding chilling, of course. Oh, and we have moves, so that's not so great that Ludvig decided to abandon me in this important moment. But we did have the bishop capturing the knight, and I have actually prepared a comment for that already because I thought that was pretty probable would happen. So Gukesh, he decides to get rid of the troublesome knight, and Ding, of course, recaptures immediately. He now has a pawn that's only 2 squares away from becoming a new queen. Ludvig, you just missed the decisions going on here.
We already talked about
Yeah, we already talked about this. I agree. No, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to ruin your
we
break.
did cover the pawn trade.
We
so
did.
much so that at some points I forgot to put the position back to the current one because I was basically treating it as if the trade had already happened.
All right. So now Ding has a pawn only 2 squares away from becoming a queen. He does have a double pawn, though. That's something we can also explain in the app. But should I make the pawn on D3 a green color? Like
Yeah.
a bright green color or a red, 2 red colors?
No, green,
No,
I think.
green.
I think we would want to highlight this pawn as red if it was in danger of being captured. But because the white bishop moves on the dark squares, the bishop is unable to attack this pawn, whereas the black bishop moves on the light squares, which means the bishop has a very easy time lending protection to its buddy. So Yeah, no, I just think this pawn is a major asset, being only 2 steps away from becoming a new queen. Obviously, the white knight right now is standing in the way of the pawn. But then, great news, we could potentially have this knight move up after to try and challenge the white knight and get it out of position. Pawn to f3 seems sensible enough from Gukesh. He's trying to create a space for his king to move into the center of the board and create a path for the king to get in. But one of my major concerns for Gukesh right now is, what about the black knight going for an attack from the side of the board, attacking yet again this white pawn that was under attack just a couple of moves prior as well. And then I think the only way to defend against this, are you going to move your rook over? Moving the rook to defend, it's the only way of keeping the pawn defended, but then the white rook ends up in a very passive situation, just being relegated to a very, very passive responsibility. But on the other hand, it might.
But he could have done that
worse.
in the last move as well.
What?
He could have played this rook to this square in the previous move as well. And he didn't. Oh, then he was worried about this one. Yeah, okay.
There was a pawn undefended in the middle.
Okay, true. I was just wondering if his previous move indicated that he didn't want to put his rook in such a passive position.
No, this is a different situation. Also, one thing to mention is that I said this latest move from Gukesh is about bringing the king into the middle, but it could also be about improving the positioning of the bishop. Gukesh could potentially be trying to move his bishop into the middle of the board via that square that became available as the white pawn advanced forward.
The bishop, was that what you just said? Yeah, exactly. Okay, well,
in either case, I think one of the moves I really want to play as white, I really want to play the move pawn forward, because then the pawn is going to take control of both the squares that I wanted to use to get this knight into the game. So I think another thing we should talk about is the fact that pawn forward was not chosen by Gukesh, and there could be some kind of trickery for the black rook pointing down on white's pawn in that case. So yeah, from a logical perspective, getting this pawn forward to take control of the squares that the black knight wants to move into, it made a ton of sense. And I'm very scared on Gukesh's behalf. Obviously, he calculated this move and made the assessment that this could land him in some trouble. And that is very, very concerning, because that move could potentially solve all his problems. And it is something he's going to be looking for now in the future as well, which is why I was suggesting that the black knight should move forward now before white finds a good opportunity to use the pawn and restrict the movement of the knight forward.
okay. And that is also what the computer is suggesting in Take app, that the knight move forward to the c4 square, so this direction here, and putting pressure both on the pawn in the middle and also on the pawn over there.
Putting pressure on pawns and knights. The knight, I would say, is maybe the most important thing.
Okay.
Because this knight is standing in the way of the pawn trying to become a new queen. So getting rid of the blockading knight is one of the main priorities. On the other hand, if this happens and they end up trading the knights off, then it is going to be very difficult for Ding to win this game because Ding's bishop moves on the light squares while Gukesh's bishop moves on the dark squares. And that means the two bishops can never challenge one another. But it also means that when you put the bishop in a blockading position, for instance, if you have the white bishop standing in the way of the black pawn trying to advance, then it becomes very, very difficult to break through and get a new queen, because you cannot use your bishop to kick white's bishop away.
And now Ding has played his knight forward to the square. He is threatening to trade the knights and enter this opposite colored bishop stuff that you were just showing.
Yeah, and I don't see Gukesh having much choice but to accept.
Yeah, that's what I agree with. I wrote that he's forcing the trade of knights. I don't know if that was a bit harsh, but
yeah.
What else could you do?
Yeah, no, there's a threat against the pawn here, and there's the threat against the pawn over here. So I think it's very difficult for Gukesh to avoid this trade now. And if this trade happens, I think one of the key plans that Ding can utilize is he's going to want to attack these pawns over here. And he's going to move his rook up through the center, and then the rook is going to move over all the way to the other side and start pointing towards the white pawns, which is going to be really, really annoying for Gukesh to deal with. Maybe Gukesh needs to somehow maneuver his rook.
Gukesh has gone for the trade of knights as he had to. Okay. And Ding, of course, recaptures immediately.
So knight trade takes back. It's the same amount of pawns for both players. But the big thing right now is that Ding's pawns are closer to becoming a new queen.
And Gukesh now sends his rook. He played this move very quickly. He only spent 3 seconds on that move. Wasn't that kind of crazy?
Well, the thing is, by attacking the black pawn, so Gukesh is trying to get Ding to move his bishop to protect the pawn, because then it would be impossible for Ding to move his rook up, because now the bishop is blocking the rook's intention. And then I think Gukesh feels like he's going to get his rook in the middle of the board, where it's going to influence down towards black's half. It's going to make it a lot more difficult for the black pawn to advance. And it's just going to be an active positioning of that rook. And then he's just going to sit here and wait.
And if Ding tries to go for some rook trade, is that just going to go towards a draw?
Any rook trade would just be a draw.
Okay.
I would say, because when the bishops are on opposite colors, the only piece that can take control of the colored square that your opponent is controlling is the rook, right? The bishop on the light squares can never challenge the dark squares, so that's going to be the rook's task. If the rooks are traded off, then breaking up the blockades are going to be impossible. So right now, I think this position is very likely to end in a draw.
Okay.
I think this...
Is it hammer time?
No, are you crazy?
I'm trying to... I want to click on the buttons.
Yeah, no, but... well, you could... well...
There's a hammer time button.
Yeah, sure, but the chess engines are massively favoring Ding, right? But...
I trust you more than those computers. If you say this is going to be a draw, then we can click on the hammer time and I would be happy.
Well, I'm not convinced yet, but I see Gukesh's intention on how he's planning to maneuver his rook into the middle and create a barrier that's going to be very difficult for Ding to get past. And so I'm feeling like draw is very much the most likely result, although it is too early to call it definitively.
All right. And now it is Ding who is thinking. I'm just realizing we're not going to be able to use these checkmate buttons probably anymore. So we've gotten to use that a lot today. We haven't pushed the blunder one either. There hasn't really been a big blunder.
These guys are too good to make blunders. Well, I guess there was some blunders when they got really, really low on time in that game 3.
Oh, yeah.
So, but we're getting a mistake button.
Yeah,
because these guys, they make some mistakes, but they basically never make outright blunders. Something that's very obvious how to punish.
A lot of our viewers are suggesting that Ding protect this pawn with this pawn instead of his bishop that you were showing, Ludvig. Do you have any opinion on that move?
Yeah, I do not like this move, and the reason is that. By pushing the pawn forward, I lose the ability to use my rook over here and point down towards the white pawn. So in order to make a breakthrough, I think I'm going to need to use my rook to target the queenside pawns. But I'm not going to be able to do that if I put my own pawn in front of the rook.
Oh, but we just got a very different move from Ding of any of the moves that have been discussed so far.
Ding tries to target the rook immediately with his bishop.
Instead of protecting his pawn.
But in doing so, he doesn't protect his pawn. On the other hand, Maud, if the pawn now is captured, Ding can move his rook behind the pawn, and there's no way for Gukesh to stop the pawn from becoming a new queen.
You seem shocked.
I am shocked. What did he calculate this, or was this a miss?
Whose miss?
Gukesh's.
But
Gukesh moves his rook into the center of the board, which was his plan with the previous move. But now Ding, in addition to having the pawn one step closer to becoming a queen than any of White's pawns, now Ding can just capture a white pawn. How is this not a major development in Ding's favor?
yeah, should we say that there's a mistake? Was there a mistake somewhere?
The chess engine did not change its evaluation at any point. But I mean, this feels like something happened. So if the king now moves closer to attack the bishop needs to keep its protection down towards the queening square to help the pawn to push forward. And then the king can continue further into the middle. Now the king is controlling the pawn, so the pawn can no longer step forward. But now Ding can move his rook over to protect the pawn. Ooh, but then the white rook goes to attack the black pawns. I cannot tell whether this is Gukesh being a genius or what's going on. But it would seem like Gukesh has given up a pawn in order to get his king faster into the middle of the board. And he's relying on the fact that his rook will be able to capture some of black's pawns should Ding try to hold on to the pawn he's about to capture. This is very interesting. Potentially a brilliant defensive plan from Gukesh.
So we were considering if it was a mistake, and now you're saying it might have been a great move?
It's very difficult to assess without seeing what the next couple of moves are going to be.
Okay. So we might have to do a retroactive great move to Gukesh's plan of sending his rook into the center. He must have seen this.
It's a controversial move in any case.
Controversial.
That he's giving up a pawn, but he's saying that it's acceptable to give up a pawn because it maximizes the activity. It maximizes the positioning of his pieces. And I mean, if I'm Ding, I'm taking the pawn. There's no way I'm letting that pawn go.
Well, I've called it a controversial move now.
Yeah, because that one's fairly safe.
Yeah, who's going to argue with that? Magnus?
Even if it was good or if it was bad.
It
could definitely be controversial.
It's Magnus's birthday today, by the way, so I'm wondering if he's appreciating that we sent him a push notification as the game was getting interesting. Don't you think that he also thinks this is probably a very interesting position? Or do you think he can see?
No, I mean, he's so good that he's going to feel like either this is obviously a draw or it's obviously going to be winning. I feel like. Because Magnus has the human assessment down pretty well. And so he can often tell what a human result is going to be despite what the chess engines say. But from the studio, we definitely do want to extend our congratulations to Magnus, a boss and a former champion, and a current champion in Blitz and Rapid on his birthday.
And the people in our chat are also saying happy birthday to Magnus. And and now Ding has captured that pawn.
No, I mean, if your opponent gives you a free pawn, you gotta grab it. That's the only way to refute a sacrifice is by accepting it.
But now the computer is saying it's more balanced than it was.
Oh, wow. So was capturing the pawn a mistake, or was it about where he put the bishop afterwards? Ding moves his bishop back where it came from. That really surprises me because Ding needed to move the bishop back on the left side of the board because then if rook captured pawn, then there would be no stopping the pawn from becoming a new queen because the bishop would be controlling the square where the pawn became a new queen, thereby winning the game. So if Ding wanted to keep the pawn that was under pressure from the white rook, if he wanted to keep this pawn protected, he needed to go back on the left side. When he went back in the opposite direction, now Gukesh can safely capture the black pawn, and that isolates the black pawn that's trying to become a new queen. Now that most forward black pawn is lacking a lot of the protection it had earlier. And Gukesh is planning to move his rook back into the middle of the board. Pretty much no matter what Ding does on the next move, Gukesh is going to move his rook back, and then there's going to be a draw. And indeed, this is what's happening. This game is going to be over now in a matter of seconds. Ding moves his rook to support his pawn in the chase of becoming a new queen, but now Gukesh is going to move his rook into the middle, and he's going to offer the trade between the rooks, and Ding is going to accept that trade. But we said this earlier, and I did warn you, after the trade between the rooks, there are no ways of winning this game. Then the blockade will be impossible to stop, because with the bishops moving on opposite colored squares, the white bishop can stand in the path of the black pawn, and there will be no chance for Ding to chase the pawn away from that or chase the bishop away from blockading the pawn.
All right, so I'm alerting people. I'm not alerting. That was the wrong way of wording it. I am posting that this is going to be a draw. You support that, Ludvig?
Yeah, it's hammer time.
It's hammer time.
Hammer time is when I say that I'm certain what the result is going to be. I have been wrong a couple of times.
Many times.
No, rarely. A couple of times I've been wrong. But most of the time I get it right. The bishop moves into the center of the board from Ding. And basically now the players are just trying to figure out how can we make a draw in a way where, as quickly as possible.
Legal. They're not allowed to offer each other a draw before move 41. So they kind of have to do a back and forth situation. Ding's move now is threatening a pawn, so I assume that Gukesh will somehow protect that pawn.
Yeah, I expect Gukesh to move his pawn one step forward so that the two pawns are protecting each other and preventing this bishop from getting into that side of the board.
So I've deemed it a mistake when Ding retreated his bishop in one direction and should have done the other. Is that too harsh of me?
It's difficult to say because the thing is the position was likely to be a draw regardless, I would say. Because Gukesh's pawn sacrifice, it's not like he gave away a pawn for no good reason. He did it on purpose with the intention of creating a blockade. So I would say it's close to being too harsh, because I had just said a couple of moments earlier that I thought the game was going to be a draw. And that's kind of where we are headed right now. Ding allows his pawn to be captured, I think. He moves his king forward, but doesn't do really much effort to reinforce the protection of the pawn in the center of the board. And Ding just goes for a blockade here. Ding allows his pawn to be captured. He's now down one pawn on the board. But notice how Ding has placed all his pieces on the light squares. There's absolutely no way for Gukesh to break through. So even though Ding has gone from having the advantage of a pawn to now being down a pawn, both players are very aware that this game is not going anywhere, and it is going to end in a draw.
I'm typing as fast as I can because the moves are just
Yeah. No, notice how Ding put all of his pieces on the light squares, and that means that the black bishop is unable to attack any of the black pieces. And so there's no way to make any headway. And the players are now going to go back and forth.
We're waiting for the back and forth, or will they reach move 40 first? Maybe I can make a poll for that, but first I have to quickly comment on all of these moves that are coming in. The kings are moving back and forth now, I think.
I think so too. Yes. The kings are moving back and forth. There's no way to make progress for either player. Ding was closer to getting the win in this game, but they shake hands. The game is over. A draw has been agreed. I believe there may have been 3 times back and forth there. And yeah. Or maybe they actually made it to move 40. Maybe they agreed to a draw.
Yeah, I was trying to see if I couldn't tell. Maybe they both just looked at each other and were like, yeah.
Yeah. Regardless how they agreed, it is a draw. And Ding's advantage there for a little moment, it didn't last long. And maybe a bit disappointing that Ding was not kind of able to get more out of what felt like a nice advantage. But even though the advantage was nice, it was never winning. It was never massive. And I think the fact that Ding settled for a draw so easily, really, it speaks to the fact that he felt that Gukesh's defensive plan of putting the rook in the center of the board was very effective. And Ding felt, I can't really break through against this.
So would you say that Ding made a mistake?
Oh, we've gotten
I had to test it. I had to
a
test
new
it.
one.
We have a new one. We have several new ones now. We also have one for the novelty. So I'm excited for tomorrow. When we get a new move in the opening, then we will use that button.
Can we test it?
Well, it's kind of a novelty to press the novelty button. Ooh.
Yeah. Tomorrow is gonna be the day when we explore new moves, new avenues of play, because today the players have agreed to a draw. It was a combative game. Ding once again playing the French opening, which is quite a risky way of playing. And even when Gukesh tried to play in the safest way you can play as white, Ding kept on playing a risky move, making it an interesting game, actually getting the advantage at one point. But Gukesh's defensive fortress was enough to convince Ding that this wasn't going anywhere. And as such, the game ended in a draw.
The game ended in a draw. Is there anything else for us to say or do here? I guess happy birthday to Magnus. I imagine I'm looking forward to hearing his take on this game. Like you said, there were some interesting moments. But until then, we will be back to test new buttons tomorrow.
We'll see you tomorrow, everyone, at the same time for Game 6, where Ding will have the white pieces.